You're listening to a Monster Kid podcast.
Why don't we rent a video tonight?
Yeah, can we please?
On a weeknight?
Yeah, come on, Mom. It's okay.
Sure. Come on. Let's throw caution to the wind.
Put a little weekend in your week. Rent a video.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Vericon Video, a show where we relive forgotten and unforgettable movies that once lined the shelves of video stores everywhere. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Jordan.
And today we're talking about a time travel thriller that many people might have missed or probably haven't given much thought to since its release. So we're traveling back 20 years to revisit Frequency. In this episode, we're going to be testing out a totally new format for the show, so bear with us and be sure to let us know what you think of the updates. So sit back, relax in front of that ham radio, and welcome.
Welcome to the Cafe 80s, where it's always morning in America, even in the afternoon.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. I have the only gun on board. Welcome to Con Air.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Okay, good evening, America, and welcome aboard Apollo 13.
I'm so glad you could come. This is going to be such an exciting day. I hope you're enjoying it. I think you will.
John Sullivan, a New York homicide detective, accidentally discovers a cross-time radio frequency on his late father's ham radio, which allows the two to speak to each other 30 years apart. Soon, father and son find themselves working together to stop a serial killer and change history. So, Jordan, If you could talk to someone across time from the present, who and when would it be? What would you talk about? And more importantly, how would you prove you're from the future?
Oh, gosh. We're going to get really sentimental this far up in the show. I would probably phone my grandmother because this has been a very hard year. We lost my grandmother earlier this year. And I would use this as a way of finding her sometime, maybe in the 70s. You know, it would be my way of saying goodbye to her in that sense. And in order to prove that I am from the future, she's a Brooklyn Dodgers fan. And so I would tell her that she would have to wait another 16 years to see the Dodgers win the World Series. Or I could just predict like what's going to happen in the 72 World Series or whenever I actually phone in. Like this movie with the 1960 Mets, I'd pick a good, relevant sports thing that she would know or that she would remember for the rest of her life. And I'd go, this is going to happen here. Bet on it or something.
That's been a tried and true method, as we've seen in countless films.
Yeah, but especially here.
Yeah. I would probably go back and... This sounds very uninteresting, but I would probably talk to myself or my mother just because I would want to tell somebody about what's happened in the last 20 years or even 30 years. I would go back to like the early 90s just because I would want to hear about all the stuff that was going on back then because that's kind of my little soft spot. But I would prove that I'm from the future. I would just tell them about the iPhone. and the internet. I mean, I know it would sound like the ravings of a lunatic, but think about it. Like if you physically went back to the past and not just had like a means of communicating with the past, if you just took an iPhone back with you, that's all you would need.
Everybody'd be like, oh, what the hell? Then we don't need to do all these separate things now. We can just add this.
Right. Like it's like,
blow some minds.
You have a pocket television.
Yeah. Pretty soon people are going to be watching Christopher Nolan movies on this and he's going to hate it.
And you could show people pictures of their older selves.
Yeah.
Like, see, you still look great in 2020.
Yeah. There's a reason why there's not a lot of time travel movies anymore because people could just all be like, oh yeah, this is you 30 years ago. You know, I'm from the future. And they go, oh, okay. No 30 minutes of conflict there.
Right. So, Jordan, what is your connection to this movie or memories of it when it came out?
Well, it's very odd because the year 2000 kind of marks my entry into having a huge special interest about movies. And 2000, I would look at like the newspaper and just see the little like attractions or in theaters. And they have like a bunch of just like standee posters in the paper of like what's out right now. And at the same time, I would just be really into what was coming out on VHS. And I would just look at all the Blockbuster guides and all the Hollywood video pamphlets and just look at like all the movies that were out. And Frequency was one of those movies where I had just seen the poster and I had seen the aesthetic that the trailers are going for. And I'm like, I'm 5, so I don't know what this movie is about, but this looks really cool. And it's a movie that's always stuck in the back of my mind. And I think I caught it on cable a while ago. And I remember being really impressed with it, but I hadn't really thought about it. I'll be candid. I was trying to think of a good, like, early 2000s, late 90s sort of sci-fi sort of thing to do for an episode. And I had just a list, and Frequency was on there. I was like, oh yeah, that could work. And I'm like, it could be a long shot because not a lot of people remember it. And I sent it to you, and you were like, well, how is that a long shot? That's a great movie.
Right. Yeah, I was really surprised to see it on the list. I remember my family and I rented this when it came out on VHS back in the day, and I haven't seen it since, but it has always stuck with me. Like, I always thought it was an enjoyable movie, but I couldn't really remember why. Yeah. And I later picked it up on DVD used for $0.25 at some used bookstore. And nice. And I still hadn't watched it. And so whenever you sent me that list of possible movies that we could cover from the early 2000s, I thought, man, this would be a great opportunity to go back and revisit that.
And it's also just a movie that's sort of been like not majorly relevant in the last 20 years, but like it'll come up in conversation every once in a while. And every now and then someone will be reminded, oh, hey, this movie Frequency is actually really good. Right. And in just the most like wholesome and impressive of like niche movie circles that'll come up. And so I haven't really thought of it from that. And so I thought it would be a good one to cover for this.
All right. So let's give you guys a little bit of background on Frequency. It stars Dennis Quaid, Jim Caviezel, Jesus himself, John Doyle, and Elizabeth Mitchell. It was directed by Gregory Hoblit, who had cut his teeth on directing episodes of Hill Street Blues, LA Law, and NYPD Blue, before hitting the big screen with Primal Fear, which was followed by Fallen and then Frequency. He would later direct Heart's War, Fracture, and Untraceable. The film is written by Toby Emmerich, who has only 2 writing credits, this and The Last Mimsy.
Okay.
Although he has a robust career as a producer and executive in charge of music, and now I believe is still the chairman of the Warner Brothers Pictures Group.
Yeah.
And, his brother is Noah Emmerich, who appears in the movie as the 1999 Gordo.
Yeah, soft nepotism there. It's funny that because as we record this, Toby Emmerich is very much in the news because when there was the official press release about Warner Brothers releasing 13 of their major releases on HBO Max as well as in theaters in 2021, Toby Emmerich was one of the main figures who was, responsible for the press release, responsible for the information about it. So he's still a very big figure in Warner Brothers. And it's very interesting when you see a known producer or a known like executive who has other like writing credits. It's like the fact that there's that horror movie that RMR covered that Harvey Weinstein wrote.
Oh, The Burning.
The Burning. Yeah, the Cropsey one. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see executive and producer types when they're still trying to just write and do actual tangible movie roles.
Right. So Gregory Hoblit first read the script in November 1997, 18 months after his father's death. For the next year or so, rumors abounded. Stallone, Sly, not Frank, was to play Frank Sullivan, but dropped because of a fee dispute. And Rennie Harlan was in talks to direct, according to Variety. The film was finally greenlighted for production in January 1999. And in an interview shortly after the release of Frequency, Hoblit described the film as high risk since the project had already been passed on by several directors, including one of note who had twice the budget Hoblit was eventually given. And so I wonder if he was referring to Harlan there or someone else, because Hoblit was no slouch at this point with a lot of TV and 2 pretty successful back-to-back thrillers under his belt.
Yeah. It's funny that you bring up the sort of late 90s Stallone sort of like, yeah, I want to be in this sort of thing. Because a professor I had in college, a guy by the name of J.D. Zeik, who wrote the movie Ronin, that's his sole screen credit. And he's talked a lot about just his difficulties with the entertainment industry. He worked with James Cameron for a couple of years, but he was working on a project and he had a meeting with Sly Stallone. I think Sly Stallone wanted him to write another Rambo movie or something like that. And JD told us that he has this meeting with Stallone, and Stallone shows up with his agent, and Stallone says, hey, it's great to meet you. I loved Ronin. I fired my agent when I didn't get Ronin. And you just see the agent just sort of like, tugging at his collar going, So this was Stallone in the late 90s, just sort of, I want to do cool things like this, where in reality, a lot of the Stallone stuff from the late 90s was just, Daylight.
Right.
Copland.
Copland, yeah. You know, Ronin is one of our Monster Kids, Ryan S., one of his favorite movies.
It's an excellent movie.
Yeah, that's one that I definitely need to go back to.
It is. The only thing about it is that because of the disagreements that J.D. Zeik, the writer, had on that film with John Frankenheimer, a lot of the screenplay was repolished by David Mamet without J.D. really knowing, and he had to really fight for like an official screenplay credit, and to the point where I think that the way they worked it out with the WGA, Mamet was credited under a pseudonym with a story credit. So J.D. got the official screenplay credit, even though there was some Mamet things going on there.
Oh,
that's interesting because, you know, a lot of the patter and the staccato in that is very much Mamet, but a lot of the ideas and the screenwriting basis are very much J.D. So
on April 25th, 2000, the New York Mets and Cincinnati Reds played a game wearing their 1969 uniforms to promote the film.
Nice. I will lampshade here because I'm going to go into more detail on this as we go. But I am also a very big baseball fan.
Yes.
And that's what's another one of my special interests. And I always get a kick out of teams wearing like throwback uniforms, like just old school uniforms, just for a day or so or for a series, just because they look really cool. Like, I'm from the Philadelphia area, and I am lucky enough that my Phillies like to wear these baby blue 80s uniforms whenever, like every like Friday they play at home, they'll just throw them out and they'll be really cool. So I love just old school touches like that. Yeah, I'm glad that the Mets and Reds played along with this movie's release because this is a very Mets-friendly movie and a very baseball-friendly movie.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, we're going to be diving into that much later for sure. The film was released on April 28th, 2000, grossing $9 million during its opening weekend and over $68 million worldwide against a budget of $31 million.
Cool.
And it hit video store shelves on DVD Halloween Day 2000, and oddly didn't see a VHS release until April 3rd, 2001, almost a year after its theatrical release.
Interesting, because that was still at the beginning of the DVD sort of crossover thing. Because we didn't get our first DVD player until Christmas 2001. I remember that fairly because the first two movies I had on DVD were Shrek and the Ron Howard Grinch movie. So Christmas 2001, that's what I remember. So, but everything before then was just VHS. So it's weird that even in 2000, it took that long for Frequency to get a VHS.
Yeah, I think we got our DVD player around that same time because one of the first DVDs that I owned was Tron.
Oh, cool.
And which it's been a thing for me because every time there's a new format introduced, the first one I get is Tron.
Yeah.
And so I have it on everything from VHS to Beta to Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, digital, you name it.
Amazing. Are you going to get the 4K when it's out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Yeah, it deserves a 4K release.
Of course, even with the contrast of special effects, it still needs to be seen on the coolest and clearest screen possible.
Yes.
So.
In November 2014, it was reported that Supernatural showrunner Jeremy Carver was in talks to produce a new television series adaptation / reboot based on the film for NBC. The network passed on it, and a pilot was ordered at the CW in January 2016, and the series was canceled in May 2017 after only one season.
The CW, man. They have the best of intentions. They really do, but it's a bizarre network.
It really is. And I was planning on watching an episode or two of the series, but I didn't really care enough to do that.
It sounds like because here's the thing. Frequency is a cool concept for a movie, but I feel like for a show, they would make it into a procedural by using the second half of the movie where Jim Caviezel uses Dennis Quaid to solve crimes as the hook of the show.
Right.
And that doesn't sound like the kind of show I would want to watch.
Yeah, same. And I feel like it would have really, I mean, maybe it does, it would really amp up the sci-fi element. Whereas I feel like in the movie, it's way in the background.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't draw too much attention to itself.
Nowadays, when there is a sci-fi element, the writers and producers want to answer too many questions rather than letting us ask them ourselves.
Yes.
Which is why this movie is so great, because there's a fantastical element that is left to us to sort of figure out. And it doesn't really explain too much, which I like that sort of minimalism in films, especially with fantastical elements.
Yeah, no, I do as well. So let's see what came out in 2000. So let's give you guys a little bit of context here. So We have Mission Impossible 2, X-Men, Memento, Unbreakable, The Sixth Day, Hollow Man, Gladiator, and The Watcher.
So first of all, I don't think Memento got like a wide release until I think March 2001.
Mm-hmm.
So that, because I think it was in contention for some awards and accolade in the 2001 calendar year rather than 2000. I think that's how it worked. I have to do research again. But The Watcher, that's the one. That's the movie for any movie miscellany fans out there. That's the movie that Keanu Reeves literally verbally agreed to be in his friend's movie during a pickup hockey game, and then his friend fudged Keanu Reeves' signature. And because Keanu Reeves is such a good guy, he didn't like try and get out of it. He just didn't promote the movie.
I remember seeing that movie in theaters with my mother.
Oh.
And yeah, it was very strange because he plays like a serial killer.
Yeah.
And James Spader is after him.
Which if they made that now, it'd be like flipped.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't remember it being particularly good.
Oh, God, no. It can't be good. And that was like a year after The Matrix.
Yes.
And so there he is, like, killing his career again. And then poor guy. I'm glad he has his career back because he's killing it right now.
Yeah.
But the fact that this guy's had so many career droughts and so many times for his career to be sort of resuscitated in a sense after The Matrix or after John Wick 2, I mean, he's doing well now. Yeah, and he's at a point where he can do more fun stuff, these passion projects. Like, he was in the new Bill and Ted film, which I thought was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. Because he wanted to, because him and Alex Winter had been talking for like 20, 30 years, and like, when are we going to do another one? And he had the clout, and they did it.
Yeah. So what else was happening in the world when this came out? So it was the new millennium. We survived the Y2K scare, this economic and technological catastrophe that never happened.
There needs to be a movie that centers around the absolute hysteria of Y2K. I wrote one a couple of years ago that involves the sort of paranoia of the world's going to end that also involves the sort of like sci-fi sort of character that's from the future that knows it doesn't happen, and they use that to their advantage.
That sounds pretty interesting.
It's a weird, cool script I need to polish again one of these days. But yeah, there's definite anxiety behind Y2K, and even in the first couple months of 2000, it's the sort of, okay, we're good, but are we sort of teetering on the brink kind of thing?
Yeah, and then we're hit with 9/11, which we'll talk more about in a minute. But 9/11 became one of the great before and after historical, cultural, and social moments, of our lifetime, really, which got situated in film criticism as well. But besides some of the more obvious, like in the wake of 9/11 films, what were some of the things that you saw change in the mainstream, like in broader terms?
I said this to someone recently. I forget where it was. It might have been here. It's the kind of thing where like the movies that stopped filming before 9/11 are vastly different they just have a different feel than the ones that started filming after 9/11. Like, it's just like, here's what I equate it to. Because Simon Pegg was doing an interview and he was talking about a scene from the movie Paul, which, it's a fine movie. It's dumb. And he talks about a shot that was happening when he was standing at somebody's door. I think he was standing at Blythe Danner's door at this shot. He says, there is a camera angle and a camera change here. And in between this shot and the next shot, I become a father. And you can clearly see in the first shot, I'm looking a lot more sort of wet behind the ears, sort of, less serious. And in the second shot, I know the gravity of the situation. My life holds a lot more purpose now. And movies in 2001, 2002 might have been a lot like that, where we were taking a lot more for granted in 2001. And a lot of the movies filmed like that, like even the ones that were coming out in spring 2002, like Life or Something Like It's, just weird, like, okay, I guess this could have made sense in 2000 or 2001, but does this make sense now kind of shit? And then the ones that really hit home afterwards.
Even though 9/11 didn't happen until a little bit later after this film came out.
Right.
I wonder if its sentimental aspects and, since it is about the loss of a father and wanting to have that back because it was stolen, or John's character feels like it was stolen from him. I wonder if that affects how audiences would receive or interpret the film post 9/11.
I will say that if this would have come out in like October 2001, it would have made $100 million.
Yeah. Yeah.
This would have been exactly what people needed.
Mhm.
And even if they wouldn't have known when they filmed it could, not only is this a winning back a father film, but it's a New York film. It's a New York Mets film.
Oh, yeah.
And like in other reasons, I am glad it came out in the year 2000. It would have been a great pick-me-up after 9/11. But at the same time, it works because even a year after, people could have put that on as a feel-good sort of pick-me-up, sort of New York is going to rebound sort of feeling, especially that ending. It's a very optimistic ending.
Yeah. Maybe we need to phone Gregory Hoblit circa 2000 or 1999 and tell him to just hold off for a year.
Maybe we should call Garth Brooks.
Oh, yeah. I can't wait till we get to that bit because I have some thoughts.
Garth, it's Jordan. Don't do an entire album as Chris Gaines. It's going to ruin your career.
I remember seeing that at Walmart whenever it came out. And is he fucking crazy?
He did an SNL. He did Garth Brooks as the host, Chris Gaines as the musical guest, and it was the dumbest thing. He's a great host. Don't get me wrong. He was awesome whenever he hosted, but his Chris Gaines thing was not fooling anybody.
It was kind of sad because I grew up a Garth Brooks fan because, I mean, I grew up in the South and everybody listened to country music. It was what you listened to. And so Garth Brooks was a staple of pop culture at the time. And yeah, I don't know. Around this time, like when did he do the Chris Gaines thing? Was that?
That was 99.
99. Okay. So this is just after. That's interesting.
Yes.
Huh. I thought this was interesting. Just a few months after the film's release, a huge solar flare known as the Bastille Day event occurred on July 14th. It was the largest solar flare recorded since 1989, followed by a full halo coronal mass ejection from the sun and a geomagnetic superstorm on July 15th through the 16th. And the radiation began reaching Earth within 15 minutes, causing disruptions to satellites and exposing air travelers to radiation that was equal to that of a chest X-ray.
Wow. So this could have happened is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that I'll talk about a little bit more later, but this happens just about every decade, this kind of phenomenon. And it was just kind of interesting that this happened just following the release of the film. So we got a few little tidbits of trivia here. As I was listening to the commentary, both Gregory Hoblit and Toby Emmerich said that Michael Kamen, who scored Frequency, also scored the New Line Cinema title in collaboration with Bob Shea, who was CEO at the time. And Kamen most definitely scored the Morgan Creek title since it's a cue pulled directly from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Sadly, he died in 2003.
Well, I mean, it's one of the classier music cues to pull from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. At least it wasn't anything from the Bryan Adams song.
Right. Which the ending of this movie reminded me of that.
Oh, God.
But yeah, we'll get to that. In the warehouse fire scene, all of the firefighters except Dennis Quaid, Peter McNeil, and Jordan Bridges are real.
Yeah, they got real New York City firefighters. And I will explain in a little bit why that is so cool personally for me. Suffice to say, I know a couple New York City firefighters. Okay, so the people who wrote this movie did a lot of research on the 1969 World Series. And so all of the little tidbit and World Series facts in this film are absolutely true. For instance, the shoe polish incident, which occurs in the scene where Frank is trying to make his escape, and you also got Shepard trying to get in there and kill him and such. Cleon Jones really did get hit on the shoe with a pitch ball, and at first the umpire didn't award him first base, but when Gil Hodges, manager of the Mets, showed him the shoe polish on the ball, the umpire changes his call, awards him first base. It became known as the shoe polish incident. This and so many other little tidbits and little names from the 69 Mets prove that I don't know if the screenwriter was a Mets fan, but he did a lot of research on this team. And it shows, because this is one of the best movies about the Miracle Mets, I will say, which I'll go into some Miracle Mets stuff as we get there.
And if you look closely, there's an episode of Hill Street Blues playing on a TV when John is calling his mother. And, of course, Gregory Hoblit directed that episode.
I will say that after watching this movie, it does make sense that this movie was directed by a guy known for a lot of cop procedural shows, because the second half of this movie is essentially an episode of a cop procedural show.
Yeah.
So the shoe fits.
So a little bit more about the 9/11 connections. This is from the bowels of IMDb trivia.
Right.
But in the movie, Frank Sullivan is a New York firefighter, and the numerical address of the Sullivan's house is 343. Whenever 9/11 happened, 343 firefighters died in the collapse of the Twin Towers.
Wow.
I mean,
Eerie.
I know, right? And besides that coincidence, 2 of the doomed flight numbers appear. Frank's fire truck is 93 for United 93, and his son Johnny wears a jersey with the number 77 for American 77.
That's crazy.
People are drawing some weird connections here. A last thing, another coincidence, or is it? Jordan Bridges' number on his probationary fireman helmet is 20014, which contains the year the attack occurred and the number of planes involved in the attack.
It's like the whole thing where like if there's a specific, like in a Simpsons episode, there's like a 9 that is next to like a picture of the 2 towers on a magazine cover, and that apparently was a pre-9/11 prediction of 9/11. It's weird things that are just sort of serendipitously sort of predicting this shit. It's eerie as all hell. I will say, since we are talking about 9/11, I will bring up my 9/11 connection. I do have a lot of family in New York and New York City, and my uncle, Staten Island born and bred for like 30 years, was a New York City firefighter. And on the day of 9/11 attacks, he was literally on one of the bridges heading into Manhattan. And he was rerouted to Brooklyn, and I think he was just in charge of like finding people and just like, sifting through, ash and such. People in my family have said that like there was 2 different versions of my uncle. There was my uncle before having to see what he saw in the 9/11 attacks, and there was my uncle after he saw everything and all the carnage. And I mean, he's a very funny guy. He's kept his sense of humor. He's no longer a firefighter. He's retired. But I still do have a lot of second cousins and third cousins who are still in fire and EMT and little bits of the NYPD conglomerates. And so this is a very hit home kind of movie for me.
Oh, sure. Yeah. This friendly rivalry between the police and fire departments. And that's something I want to kind of come back to a little bit later.
Yeah. That totally exists. I was talking about my uncle. His son, my cousin, is currently an NYPD officer. And he's trying to get out of it because the whole thing is that, you got to do your service in the police department if you want to get into the fire department. And he's doing police work. But it is sort of prideful, like, how does your dad feel about you being a cop and not a fireman? Like, well, I'm getting there, But that camaraderie between the NYPD and the fire department of New York is definitely very prevalent even now and always has been. So they got that right.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about the science behind frequency. So from the surface of our sun, these clouds of plasma, along with this magnetic field discharge, it slams into the polar regions of the Earth. When impact with the atmosphere occurs, a reaction with gases creates the northern lights, or the aurora borealis. This phenomenon, along with space weather and solar radiation, can disrupt satellites and wireless communication, which occurs with the most frequency and intensity in 11-year cycles. And it has a measurable effect on ham radios as well. Yeah, so these ham radios, like, there's this little hobbyist radio service that has this formal licensing process. These solar disturbances, they alter the way high-frequency bands operate, and this allows operators to talk to faraway places. So without this solar interference, some of these contacts would not be possible. When operators make contact with other operators in areas that are normally unreachable, they send a QSL card to confirm receipt of transmission and to verify contact. And in one instance, a man sent a card to a station in Florida only to learn that the transmission he received was made over 10 years ago.
According to my dad, my grandfather had a ham radio he had in his car and would occasionally just sort of turn it on and talk to other people on the road. So it was, again, it's a very niche hobby sort of thing. And, if you were into it, you were really into it. And if you didn't, then you didn't know what the hell to do with it. And that's, I think, the disparity between Frank and John in this movie, because it's just sitting in John's house for a little bit.
Right. Now, the opening of Carl Sagan's Contact presents the idea that radio transmissions extend out into the universe indefinitely, and screenwriter Toby Emmerich latched onto this. Radio waves and other radiation are still considered light. They just have a wavelength outside the visible spectrum. Therefore, radio signals can't escape a black hole's gravitational pull. Hypothetically, however, what if some of that information bounced out and created new structures of communication, these tributaries between parallel universes? That's ultimately what anchors this film, and string theorists and quantum physicists still puzzle over this. NPR reported in June 2020 that the nearest black hole had been discovered 1,000 light years away. The more you know. the science behind the film is more or less a footnote. Like there's a Dick Cavett interview early on that situates the solar interference as the catalyst for the plot and drama to unfold around, but it's on the periphery. Like as an audience, we're not paying attention to that. And I think that's one of the invisible strengths of the film. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I'm with you. I mean, if you explain the trick, it's not as good of a trick. And so if I mean, there is a bit of a, like, it's theoretical science. It's basically just like little clips of the Dick Cavett show of just saying, well, this could happen. And then, but it's not really like the screenwriter isn't saying you have to listen to this. It's on as like a bit of background information. It doesn't explain the movie, and it doesn't put too much context to the fantastical things that are happening. I also do want to point out, why is Dick Cavett just in so many movies from this era as himself? Because Forrest Gump, obviously, but he's done a bunch.
Well, he was in Beetlejuice in 87.
Yes, yes he was.
Oh, and I think the same year he was in When Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that he would show back up in 2000.
But I'm just glad he always was like on hand to play himself. It's the greatest thing. It's the nicest thing.
Well, side note here, I used to work with this woman who was from Nebraska, and I'm assuming this is true. She said that her father cut Dick Cavett's hair for many years.
Awesome.
So I don't know. I guess he might be from Nebraska. I don't know, but
maybe.
Let's talk a little bit about how time travel works in this movie.
Yeah, because this is a cool time travel movie. It does some things that other movies have done. It does some things that not a lot of other movies do. It's very cool.
Like we have some Back to the Future-ish timeline correction stuff that happens, such as the changing of headlines, like Frank dies in the fire, and then later it's Frank saves the survivor. Case files appear and disappear. People appear and disappear from photos, and proving time travel by using sports scores.
Yes.
We also get things that manifest or change in the 1999 timeline, like the fixed ham radio and the self-upgrading furniture at the end of the film.
It's cool. Like yes, Back to the Future is the end all beat all of time travel things, but there's also just a lot of concepts swirling around in this movie that have just like been collectively agreed upon, as well as just like it doesn't do the Shane Carruth sort of heady, like you won't understand this kind of time travel, like going around in circles and shit. It's the very clear going back in time, altering the future without like completely screwing everything up sort of timeline. It's very cut and dry, very easy to manage. And I think that works, that it's that simple.
I always had an issue with the Bill and Ted films and how they treat time travel, because they rely heavily on, like, if there's intent to change something, then that's enough. We don't have to see characters do it. So it's just like they'll be in a trap and they're like, okay, just remember that we're going to plant a key or something like that.
Remember a garbage can, Ted. Boom.
Right. Yeah. Little things like that. I don't know. In thinking through that, like, I just get caught up in those logic breakdowns. If something has changed, then the change should be reflected already in the timeline, right? My brain just hurts thinking about it.
Yeah, that's a bit more complicated, but that's more individualized sort of things.
Yeah. Like the closest equivalent to how this movie treats time-altering events anyway that I can think of is something like Time Cop. Or at least that's what it feels like to me. But maybe that's because at the time the industry was starting to have more and more fun with over-the-top CGI, even when it probably wasn't necessary.
Yeah, that's probably where you're getting that from, because there are one or two minor Time Cop-esque touches late in the film. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's as over the top as Time Cop, though, because that is not a subtle movie. I mean, and no Jean-Claude Van Damme movie is subtle. What am I thinking?
Exactly. If we want to really pick through this, so I think there are some problems that emerge when Frank survives the fire. And so you have his son, John, and his friend, Satch, and
I know Emmerich is there. Yeah.
Yeah. Gordo's there. They're having a drink in the bar, and this is when, in the 1969, Frank survives the fire, and his cause of death has changed, as we learn from their conversation that he'll die from lung cancer after 30 years of smoking. And new memories are created for John, but they exist simultaneously with his old ones, and he explains this to his dad later. But if this happens to other people, we don't get that, like this impact of the timeline shift. So I don't know, this idea just falls by the wayside as the story progresses because it doesn't serve any noticeable function, you think?
I mean, I equate it to like the sort of, because he's the centralized sort of figure behind this sort of change in the time frame, he's really the only one who's connected to the both sort of realities. It's like Marty McFly in the first Back to the Future when he returns to his old time and everything's changed and he's the only one who remembers it.
Right.
So I think it's a lot like that. And I think a lot of that is left to us to sort of figure out on ourselves. But at the same time, I do think it is very cool that you just see him existing with both of these memories and the way they use the sort of slow-mo sort of intercutting during this scene. I think you just see the memories forming and fading. And even in a dream sequence right before he finds out that his mom was one of the victims in the central killer's spree, that you just see the memories forming even in his subconscious, and you just see things going in and out while he's still existing with all of them. I think that's very interesting, and it maybe needed a few more minor explanations, but I still think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, we have to forgive all or most of this because otherwise we could be left wondering, for instance, if John's mother was murdered, would he still have become a cop?
Yes.
Or would he have still lived in the house he grew up in? Things like that.
I think it's the kind of thing that, like, it doesn't need to be spelled out for us, but we can make the assumption that, yes, he would want to become a cop and find the person that murdered his mom. Or, yes, he would, the same reason he stays in his childhood house after his dad has died, he stays in his childhood house after his mom has died. Some things and some motives are just shifted over.
Yeah. And I do appreciate that both Toby Emmerich and Greg Hoblet have said that some little details do change, like in the production design, just really subtly throughout the film. Like John's home, little things would be arranged differently, and even the wallpaper changes at one point. So I think that's really, really cool, like how that, again, doesn't draw attention to itself.
Yeah, I think it just reflects that even if one variable is changed in a time travel scenario, that the exact same run of decisions will not be made exactly the same every time. There is always variance. Little external factors or internal factors or things that you can't even see will sway a decision one way or another, making things very differently, the way timelines might split if a decision is made. So it's very cool that they included that. Yeah,
it's like the photo that John looks at of him and his father, and their dog. And then okay, so if his mom didn't survive after he does survive the fire, then would that photograph have been taken?
Yeah, does he still wear the same shirt?
Right, exactly. Just those little things. But again, this is a movie.
It is. It's a good movie, but it's a movie. Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the writing, some of the structural stuff. So structurally, this is a curious movie because the first 30 minutes sets up the Aurora Borealis interference and father and son separated by parallel timelines, 30 years apart, and starting to get to know each other. And then the next 30 is about stopping Frank's death in the burning warehouse. And then the last hour, the second half, really, we're focused on the Nightingale murders after we learn that John's mother becomes a victim due to Frank surviving the fire. So history has been altered because Frank's presence in the new 1969 timeline allows Jack Shephard, the Nightingale, to survive in the hospital and kill 7 more women than he would have originally. So how do you feel about frequency in these structural terms?
This is the thing I've said, because this is a tale of two different halves. The first half is this entirely banks on the sort of fantastical element, while the second half is more on the procedural murder mystery element. And while by a stroke of chance, they kind of fit together and make a great movie together, it almost doesn't work because, we didn't really expect with this concept to get a sort of general murder cop mystery for the second half. And while it's really good, it's just not quite the first half. And it's odd in that respect. I think that it's still a good movie, but it's just very disjointed in that structural standpoint. And I also find it funny that a movie like this has a character named Jack Shephard attempting to kill Elizabeth Mitchell, considering that on Lost, a character named Jack Shephard would be romantically entwined with a character played by Elizabeth Mitchell. So But Jim Ford would get him.
Emmerich said in the commentary, like, whenever John comes home and he is about to learn that his mother is no longer there, like she's been erased because she's been murdered, Emmerich says that, okay, for you film students out there, this is the end of Act 1. So I thought that was interesting because it doesn't feel like an act, like the end of an act. But,
well, here's the thing. For any of you film students out there, Act 1 should not be over one half of your movie.
Right.
Act 1 should end, like, the whole thing is that, like, you know, it's different from all that for everybody, but, like, you've got to start Act 2 before, like, the second half of your movie begins, or else it's going to be really lopsided.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you're James Cameron, in which case you're working with 5 acts, you've got to at least balance it out. And you could easily make a whole movie out of just saving Frank from the fate, and then that sort of factoring into John's life. But at the same time, you know, there needed to be higher stakes. That is the worst thing about being a screenwriter in Hollywood. The stakes are never high enough. And there's always a producer saying, why don't you throw this character into danger? Or why don't you do something else? And it would have been a good enough movie. It was just him saying his father. But it's fine when he also has to save his mother. It just feels like another movie that's been thrown in.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically a 2-part structure.
Yes, it is.
Which is fine. I feel like it for what this movie is, it works.
Yes.
And I know you have a point later about, you know, is that shift too jarring? And I definitely want to get to that. But
yeah,
let's talk about that bit now. Like,
yeah, let's do it.
To me, the first part, we won't call it the act. The first part, it has some resolve, and then a new story is essentially unfolding, a new narrative that we're going to follow.
Yeah.
And so talk about that shift, like what you observed.
I think you're right there in that the first half has a really good finish with that really good scene between John and Frank sort of bonding. And that's a really good ending bit there. But it's still a bit jarring that, okay, now there's another movie that we have to deal with here. The one thing in terms of like jarring two half sort of things, I always think of the movie Something Wild, which is a Jonathan Demme film, where the first act is this very zany, entertaining comedy with Jeff Daniels and Melanie Griffith. And at the very end of the first half, you just see they're doing this slow dance at like a high school reunion, and you see the lights sort of dim a little bit, and that's basically your way of knowing, okay, things are about to get dark. And right after that, Ray Liotta enters the film, and it becomes a very dark sort of thriller type movie for the rest of it. And I think it works there. It's just, I think, less jarring here because, I mean, I think it's sort of jarring in frequency, but at the same time, these are both types of action movies. The first one is sort of action in, even if it is a sentimental kind of thing, it's still like an action movie, a drama plot. And the second half is also still along the same genre. Something Wild works despite being two different genres in the halves.
Yeah. I wonder, structurally, I don't know how much of this was the original script, but I wonder how Gregory Hoblet's background in episodic television played into that. You know, like just being able to craft essentially like a 2-part episode that's meshed together.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Like a 2-hour pilot or something.
Yeah.
Like that's what this feels like. It's a 2-hour pilot for something that would become a series.
Yeah.
Andre Braugher's even here. He was coming off Homicide: Life on the Street. So.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of these performances in this movie.
Yeah.
What do you think about Dennis Quaid in this film as Frank?
Okay. So Dennis Quaid, and we should put it in perspective, this is like about 10 years after his big boom in Hollywood, where he had a lot of starring roles, where he was Undercover Blues, right?
I think so.
I think he was, yeah. But he had a lot of just like not hair-raisingly popular movies, but just a lot of really good action comedies and like Inner Space and just a lot of fun movies. And he'd sort of boiled that down to that being his niche. And this was a nice little starring role for him, even if it was sort of a lower key kind of thing. Because he's always been a lower key kind of actor in movies like these. In my opinion, he does a really good job as the lead in this. Like he can hit the action beats even in his 40s. And he acts as a fantastic father figure in the emotional scenes. But I think we should talk about his New York accent here because
is that what it is?
It sounds like he's trying to do a Boston accent.
Yeah.
That or just a bad Staten Island accent, which Frank's from Queens. You're doing the wrong borough, Dennis. But it is a valid effort. It can just be a bit too broad for this movie's intentions at times. Like, obviously, I've been in New York quite a bit. The stereotypical New York accent is not as pronounced as it is in the movies. Not everybody goes, yeah, New York. Actually, no. My uncle from Staten Island does talk like that. But it's really just the thickness and the upbringing of the accent and of such. And not everyone does, oh, hey, forget about it. There's a lot of forget about it in this movie, especially from Jim Caviezel.
Yeah.
It works for a caricature, not exactly for likeness, but it's still a good performance, and I'll overlook the accent stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like at this time he had done some action films, but he was also doing a lot of romantic comedies and romantic dramas too.
I mean, he was married for Meg Ryan for a little bit, so you got to do a lot of rom-coms if you're living with Mrs. Rom-Com there.
You said he was good at hitting these action beats and stuff, but I think he was also really good at punctuating some of the more sentimental and emotional moments.
Right. He's done a lot more movies like that these days because he's been in both of the Dog's Purpose movies. And I think he was doing some stuff for, like, if not pure flicks, then like some very inspirational spiritual sort of movies like that.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, well.
Speaking of.
Oh, yeah, right. We have Jesus on the other hand.
Yeah, we've got Jim Caviezel here.
Jim Caviezel is one of those guys that predominantly played like the greatest heroes for a good 10 or 12 year period, because obviously he was Jesus in Passion of the Christ. He was Edmond Dantes in Count of Monte Cristo, which I still love the Count of Monte Cristo movie. They didn't know too. I think it's better than the book.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Dumas is a great writer, but a bit too much and a bit too long in the tooth. So that movie, making it, just getting the best action beats out of it, I think was really cool. But he's done that. He was the lead in Person of Interest, playing an everyman hero for a while. He's done a lot of roles like that, and he's pretty reliable, honestly.
Hoblet said in the interview that before they would roll, he would often be doing push-ups just to try to get psyched up for the moment. They just had a big laugh about that. Like, oh yeah, Jim was always doing push-ups right before we were ready to shoot. But
whatever works.
Yeah, but they said he was great. He was very dedicated. He was a big sports fan and an athlete. And so I think he probably also really liked the sports undercurrent in the film.
Yeah. I believe I have a baseball card of him because Topps, the baseball card company, did a series a couple of years ago called First Pitch, where they showcased celebrities that have thrown out the first pitch at ball games. And there was one of him, of Jim Caviezel, in throwing out a pitch at a Seattle Mariners game. He is from the Seattle, Washington metropolitan area. He is a Mariners fan, and so he was featured on a card, which I own. So he is a very nice sports fan. And, you know, while I'm sad he's not a Met fan, at least he still is into the game.
That's awesome, man. And he's also good with the accent in this movie.
Exactly. He honestly nails the New York accent more than Dennis Quaid does. And he gets down the little hardened angst that John is dealing with in the first half of the movie. He is a very strong protagonist for this. And he's also really good at matching Dennis Quaid in the more emotional movies, which really begs the question of why he didn't get more like leading parts like this, because he knocks it out right here.
Yeah. And then we get Andre Braugher as Satch.
Andre Braugher, in my opinion, is the unsung hero of the film, because he's doing a support role, but at the same time, a lot of the best lines and facial expressions come from Andre Braugher. He's getting newfound attention right now because he's great as the deadpan police captain in Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Yes.
And he's amazing in that. He's one of those guys that's just been in a million different things, can play a sort of hard-ass kind of role really well. He did Homicide for however long, but he's just really versatile and cool here, because I love the sort of laid-back character he plays in 1969 here, where he's just the friend of Frank and just like this cool younger guy. But he also goes into, he sticks to his guns in 1999 and plays the police chief and has some really good reads, especially in the diner scene with Elizabeth Mitchell.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of really good facial expressions and realization moments. He seems to be having a really nice time with the material in this movie, which I love.
Yeah, and he'd worked previously with Gregory Hoblet on Primal Fear in a supporting role, and he was one of the more likable characters, if not the only one in that movie.
Yeah.
It's a great film, though. Have you seen it?
I have. It's been a while for me.
Yeah.
Because it was on cable, but Edward Norton is incredible in that movie. Richard Gere is Richard Gere in that movie. I don't know. I still don't understand what pop culture's fascination with Richard Gere was. He's a perfectly fine actor, but he's not like God. He's not even the god of gerbils.
Oh.
I'm sorry. I had to be said.
If you're not sure what he's referring to, just Google it, folks.
Yeah, look it up. Look up. Just type Richard Gere gerbil into
at your own risk
into Google and see what pops up. Because he certainly saw what popped up.
But,
I'm so sorry.
The Primal Fear is one of those. Like, I saw it in theaters. I was 10 years old, which should not have happened. But I fell in love with Laura Linney as an actress.
Oh yeah, she's incredible.
Yeah, and John Mahoney and Andre Braugher, because he plays an investigator who's working with Richard Gere, who's this big shot attorney, and he's a little green on some of the legal terms. Like the running gag is that he doesn't quite understand what the word allegedly means, like how to use it in context. Anyway, you got to see it. He's pretty funny in that.
And for the record, Laura Linney, the movie where I fell in love with Laura Linney was Truman Show, because she's incredible in that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, The Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Oh.
A strange genre mix-up there. Or
horror courtroom drama.
Yeah, horror courtroom drama. And then we get Elizabeth Mitchell as Julia.
Yeah.
Frank's wife, John's mother.
Yeah, another real unsung hero of the movie, because she's sort of effortlessly chugging this film along. You know, like, again, this movie reminds me how I wish she'd gotten a better roles in this era before becoming predominantly a TV actress. She was basically a staple for ABC dramas for a good 10 years because she was on Lost. She did V. She did The Revolution. She was on Once Upon a Time, I think. She did a movie with Angelina Jolie right when she was coming up. I think Angelina Jolie played Gia Karanji in a movie I think that was made for HBO. And I believe she had a very intimate scene with Elizabeth Mitchell.
Oh.
But Elizabeth Mitchell was sort of on the up and up and should have gotten a better rap. I do have a fun fact about Elizabeth Mitchell before I actually get into her in this movie. Did you know that Elizabeth Mitchell changed her name in order to get into Hollywood? She changed her name. Her name is actually Elizabeth Banks.
Oh.
So, but the funny part of that is that Elizabeth Banks's real name is Elizabeth Mitchell, and she changed that to get into Hollywood. I shit you not. I shit you not. Look that up. It's 100% true. She's really good. She's really good in this. Very versatile. She's given a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of plot and emotion and does fantastically. She's a near sacrificial lamb in that Shepard is coming after her.
Ooh, the name Shepard, sacrificial lamb.
I didn't even mean that. But she's really good here. And the other thing I want to point out before we finish the acting section is that the actor who plays Shepard, I like the fact that they got an actor who isn't known for things. Because again, like if you're doing a movie about a serial killer, you lose a lot of it. Like, oh, this serial killer is played by someone you've heard of, or this person. It's not going to be very convincing. Where when they get people like I'll even throw Ted Levine in Silence of the Lambs, or the best example of this is McNamara. I think William McNamara in the movie Copycat, which is an excellent serial killer movie. I cannot recommend that movie enough. I met the director one time, John Emile, when I was doing a job in Pittsburgh at a short film camp. He was a guest speaker one day, and I got to talk to him about Copycat and The Core and some other movies he had done. But Copycat works because the serial killer actor is a guy no one has ever heard of, not a known actor, and we don't really know that it's him, and that's what makes him so convincing. Yeah, the guy who plays Shepard in this, I don't know him from many other things. He's a very nondescript, unassuming actor, and that's why he's such a good villain in this. Yeah,
this is Sean Doyle, and I hadn't recognized him from anything either.
Right.
And I thought we'll talk about his character a little bit later, but he brings more mystique than menace, I think.
Right.
Which I like in this particular type of character, even though we don't get a lot of him, like his backstory. Like as an actor, Sean Doyle, he did a fantastic job with what the material was. So let's talk about some of the characters and their development, some of the themes in the movie. So this is not surprisingly a male-centric movie focused on a paternal relationship. So we got John and Frank here. So John's a homicide detective in New York, love of baseball, particularly the Mets. Mm-hmm. He's alone, has this pseudo love interest, which disappears very quickly in this movie. And he drinks a lot, hasn't been able to escape the loss of his father at age 6. Frank, his father, is a New York firefighter, and he's probably the most diehard Mets fan I've ever seen.
Not the most diehard Mets fan I've ever seen. I'm from the New York area. I've got a lot of. I mean, look, I'll lampshade here. I grew up in a very Yankees-centric household. My dad is a Yankee fan. His dad was a Yankee fan. Got passed down generation to generation. But I do have a lot of either friends or relatives of friends who are huge about the Mets. And a very good friend of my dad who now lives out in like either Glendale or Burbank, California, one of those. He is such a high-tier Mets fan that when Shea Stadium, where they always used to play until 2009, when Shea Stadium was torn down, my dad's friend got 2 of the seats from Shea Stadium and just has them in his office.
Oh.
And so it's very cool. I was over there about 10 years ago, and there were just 2 seats from Shea hanging out there. And I'm like, this is the coolest damn thing.
That is really cool.
That is diehard Met fandom.
And the Beatles played like a huge concert there.
Oh, yeah. Shea Stadium is one of those, like Billy Joel used to play there all the time. It's very much like just an old school sort of arena. Craig Ferguson had a joke at the end of the Shea Stadium run. He's like, no, what they want to do is they want to have Billy Joel play Shea Stadium one more time before they tear it down. That thing's disgusting. It reeks of old stale beer, and the stadium's even worse. But yeah, Shea is beloved by fans, and I've actually been to the new Mets stadium, which is now called Citi Field. It's a nice place to watch a ball game.
So the means of altering the past have presented themselves to John, like save dad, dad saved, now save mom and other victims of the Nightingale. So the carrot here is John having a new relationship with his father as an adult, one that he feels like was stolen from him. And it begins as this selfish act, but also as a way for John to do what he does for a living, which is to solve crimes and save lives. So do you have any thoughts on this?
I mean, I'm glad they didn't really spell out that it becomes really this is what I always do sort of thing for John.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it becomes so natural for him to sort of help his dad track down all these potential victims. I think that somewhere in the middle of the second act, it does become less selfish and more, this is who I am, this is what I have to do. And that turn is just handled just subtly enough, I think.
Both father and son are in the business of saving lives, like in collaborative but separate camps. And once Frank survives the warehouse fire, his firefighting duties disappear from the story, which I think is a curious move. I mean, it needs to happen so Frank has the time to help John stop the Nightingale murders and catch the killer. But I don't know, what should we make of this since it's such a big part of the story up to this point?
Well, you have to remember that the person who's directing this isn't exactly known for fireman shows.
Right.
So old habits will have to die hard with Gregory Hoblit.
Yeah, so let's talk about Jack Shephard, the Nightingale. Yeah. So he's a cop who's moonlighting as a serial killer, and his mother was a nurse who he kills and begins murdering female nurses, following them home from work or a bar, and then stabbing or strangling them. That's his MO. Right. I was doing a little bit of research on this because I think it's interesting, like these serial killers who were cops. Tab from Test Pattern could probably point to more examples, but there's the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo. He was, and I got this from Psychology Today. He was in the Auburn Police Department in California for 6 years before he was caught shoplifting dog repellent and a hammer, of all things. And he used his police and military training to assist in surveillance, stealth, and athletic escapes while committing more than 130 break-ins in the Visalia area, 50 rapes as the East Area Rapist of Sacramento, and 13 murders, most as the original Night Stalker. His crime spanned 11 counties, and after 1986, he lived quietly in his community, the father of 3 daughters, until his arrest in 2018 by way of genealogical DNA analysis. So we get Dennis Rader, the BTK, and the co-ed killer, Edmund Kemper, who both aspire to be cops, and other notable serial killers like John Wayne Gacy and Ted Bundy. They had approached people under the pretense of being affiliated with police. Now, Shephard doesn't use his being a cop as a way of gaining victims' trust that we know of, but it does afford him some exclusive access to information and inside knowledge of police investigation in order to avoid capture. Right. And so in the unaltered 1999 timeline, in the beginning, a body is discovered nearby his parents' house, and we're introduced to Shephard by way of his service medals and photo on display in the home, and we talk to his parents. John goes to talk to him, and the reason he's thrust into this story is by way of this alternate timeline that's created. So if Frank hadn't survived the warehouse fire, his wife wouldn't have been at the hospital later to save Shephard's life, allowing him to fixate on her and murder her and other female nurses. We don't even know what brought him to the hospital. And I kind of like that because it's not important.
Right. You know, it doesn't really matter what forms a serial killer or what makes him keep going. It's just that he does.
Yeah. And then in the new 1999 timeline, he's mostly retired, his father explains, doing some PI work on the side. And his mother is now dead. So he had murdered her. And so overall, what do you make of how Shepard is developed in the film?
I think it's a pretty basic serial killer film. I feel like they could have gone slightly into a bit more detail. Mm-hmm. We could have sure featured him a little bit more before he becomes this prevalent character in the movie in the last third. Part of what makes the character work, though, is that we really can't see in and we don't know a lot about him and how he ticks. But at the same time, you also sort of want a little bit more. It's an odd little double-edged sword there. But I think they did really well with my very intimidating character. Yeah. I
want to come back to this in our final thoughts because I want to elaborate more on the Nightingale stuff because I find that really interesting and I like him as a character. And yeah, I mean, I definitely wanted more of that. So I want to talk about that a little bit later. But why don't you tell us a little bit about some of the pop music and 60s music here?
Right. Yeah. So I always keep a lookout when I'm watching movies, especially movies that cover a specific time period or biopic or such, about what pop music is used and what is used to really signify a time. I just made a running list of a lot of the pop songs from the 60s that were featured here. Like, first of all, featured prominently in the first couple minutes of this movie in the credits, Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells. Pretty much everybody has covered this song at one point or another. It's a very good, 60s sort of standard. But also, as we sort of delve into the actual Aurora Borealis, we do hear Susie Q by Creedence. I think that's heard on Frank's radio as well. I also think it was very clever that they had a dissolve from the explosion right as Heat Wave by Martha and the Vandellas is playing. Yeah, a lot of these are very much like appropriate needle drops. There's a very sweet moment between Frank and his wife where Suspicious Minds by Elvis plays. They're Elvis fans, I think, in this, right? Frank loves Elvis.
Yeah, their dog is named Elvis. So
yeah, that makes sense. Elvis does contrast with a lot of the other stuff. And then a lot of the movie after that, there's a drought because of where we're focusing mostly on John. But once we get to the Kaleidoscope Club with Frank searching things out, there's a Dusty Springfield song that plays. And there's a Canned Heat song that plays as well in the club when he's in the bathroom getting beaten up and such. Yeah. And I don't like Canned Heat because all of the Canned Heat songs are just the lead singer guy sort of incoherently wailing. I don't like that. And it honestly undercuts what could be a very tense moment of Shepard taking the picture from Frank's wallet. You just hear the weird Canned Heat guy wailing in the background. This is all good 1960s music. It's not just one genre. It's just things that would be on the pop charts. It's a good mix of things. It puts us in the right place. And yet, despite all this really good 1960s music, we still end on Chris Gaines or Garth Brooks or whatever.
Yeah, this is a song that was recorded for this movie.
Yeah.
Called When You Come Back to Me Again. And I don't know, if you listen to the song, like it really has no connection to this movie at all.
Nope. He had a song ready.
Yeah. When we get to talking about the end of this movie, I have a few more things to say. But why don't you regale us with some more Mets stuff from 1969?
Yeah. For people who aren't really into sports, 1969 was a huge year for outer borough New York sports because January 1969, the Jets win the Super Bowl, which is a big deal for them. Joe Namath has his big game against the Baltimore Colts. And then in October, the Mets win the World Series, and both are phenomena that get talked about for ages after, called miracles, especially the Miracle Mets. And it's very interesting to note that the Mets started as a club in 1962 because, the New York Giants moved to San Francisco, and for about 8 years, they didn't have another team in New York. And so a lot of the Giants fans became Mets fans in 62. And when they started in 1962, they had the single worst record for a debut expansion team. Just got killed by every team possible. And then within 7 years, they'd accumulated enough young talent to make a World Series and win when nobody thought they would. So people to this day will still talk about the 1969 Mets and how cool they were, even though they have won a World Series since. This is why Frank Sullivan does not want to miss the World Series when he dives down the manhole at the beginning of the movie. It is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, at least until 1986 or 1973 or 2015. Yeah, there's lots of Mets colors and insignias in this movie. Like, Frank shows up in a Mets cap at his house where John also has a Mets cap on as well because it is Queens in 1969, and that's what they wear, apparently. I also find it very interesting that when we see Gordo and his kid come in, and for the record, Gordo's kid is played by Michael Cera in one of his first film roles.
Yes.
So I think that's very cool considering how into sports this character is. Michael Cera is not exactly a sports type. Gordo's kid is playing 1999 RBI Baseball, the video game, I believe. And that was a very nice and well-known baseball series. In the original timeline, Frank Sullivan's death is on the day of Game 2 of the World Series in 1969. You know, in the original timeline, we see in this movie that Andre Braugher as Satch gives young John and Gordo tickets to Game 3 of the World Series. So in the original timeline, they would have gone to Game 3 of the World Series, but probably wouldn't have because of the funeral and because of the grief behind losing his father.
Right.
I should also point out here, Andre Braugher's name in this movie is Satch. It's interesting because Satchel Paige, famed Negro Leaguer fireballer, who started in the Negro Leagues, made his way to the majors as a 40-year-old manager of the St. Louis Browns, and is one of the greatest pitchers known by man, black or white, whatever. That's probably who he was named for as Satch. That's a nice deep-cut baseball reference. As we have discussed, one of the ways that John convinces Frank that he is, in fact, from the future is giving him specific details from the 1969 World Series, talking about Tommy Agee and Ed Kranepool. John knows it all because he grew up around this series. It is how they bonded back then. It is how they bond now. This is very coincidental. This next bit is very crazy. When he's talking to Frank, he uses the line, "You gotta believe me," which may be coincidental, but to me, this immediately registered because "you gotta believe" was the official slogan of the 1973 Mets, which also made a World Series. There was a relief pitcher on that team named Tug McGraw. We know him well in Philadelphia because he also played for the Philadelphia Phillies for a while and wins a World Series with them in 1980. But Tug McGraw is this wonderfully beloved reliever in 1973's with the Mets. He makes "you gotta believe" a rallying cry for this team as they went into the 1973 World Series. You gotta believe in this team. You gotta believe we can do it. Tug McGraw is ironically another case of a father leaving a son behind young, dying of a brain tumor at age 60. His son Tim wrote a song about his father called "Live Like You Were Dying" in his honor. Yes, that Tim McGraw.
Another country music connection.
Yes.
Wow.
And again, I didn't grow up with that much of a country music influence, but I do really respect Tim McGraw. I was at a major sporting event last year in Atlanta. Tim McGraw played the tailgate party for this major sporting event.
Oh.
And he was the official musician for them. And so I can say I have seen Tim McGraw live, and I am impressed with what I have seen. I don't love that genre of country, but I think he's a great performer, and I think he's enough of a rocker and enough of a musician at heart that I can really get behind his stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that Frank and John catch up on during the great bit in the middle of the film where they're bonding finally, and we just montage back and forth. But one of the things they catch up on, because they're talking about baseball, of course, they talk about or at least John fills Frank in on the home run race of 1998, where two players, Mark McGwire for the St. Louis Cardinals and Sammy Sosa for the Chicago Cubs, chased Roger Maris's 61 home runs in a single season record. That was the talk of the entire summer because they were hitting 1 billion home runs that season. And it was going to be, okay, which one of these guys is going to set the record now? It ended up being Mark McGwire breaking the 61 record in late September 1998, and Sammy Sosa then chasing him, and it ended up being that McGwire sets the record, I think, for a couple of years at 62, 64, 62, I think. And then that record is broken in 2001 by Barry Bonds. All three of these players used performance-enhancing drugs, which were deemed illegal, and therefore all three of these records are sort of tainted in the name of baseball. But that was a big thing that was happening in 1998, and it was relevant when they were filming this. Yeah, the 1969 series is also how Frank proves his story to Satch, which is a big thing in the second and third acts. The fireworks of the 1969 World Series win go off right as Frank submerges from the water after subduing Shepard.
It's interesting how there's so much continuity there.
Yes.
These real life details, like if you're a fan, like you will, you'll recognize these things.
Yeah. It's very cool that this movie was chosen to run concurrently with the 1969 World Series and have little bits like that. And the other thing that I thought was very cool in terms of the end of this movie, in terms of the Mets, because the end of this movie is this very cool pickup baseball game with John and Frank And I believe that is John's kid is wearing a Mike Piazza Mets jersey shirt. Mike Piazza, who was a catcher that came up with the Dodgers in the early 90s and was traded to the Mets in a very big deal. Mike Piazza was Mets baseball in the 1999. He was a huge star, and he was one of the biggest stars in baseball at the time. And Mike Piazza would lead the Mets to a World Series. Ironically, in 2000, the year Frequency would be released, but they would lose to the Yankees.
Damn.
So much for that. It would have been cool if they'd won it, but I have this much baseball knowledge shooting it out my head at any time. I apologize for all the info dumping.
That's fine.
But a lot of it was relevant info dumping because this is a great baseball movie and a great Mets movie.
No, man, that was very educational. Like Mike Piazza was probably one of the few baseball cards that I owned as a kid.
Yo!
Yeah.
Now you're talking in my wheelhouse because I collect baseball cards and I have too many of them. The way I've always thought about it is that the Yankees were always the team of the elite. The Mets were always the team of the working class, the firefighters and cops and working people. And it's very fitting to have a couple of firefighters and cops being Mets fans in this movie. And I think it really works.
Let's get into a few memorable or key scenes in this movie. So these are a few that I picked out. So John and Frank meeting for the first time. What do you think about how this scene plays out?
I mean, look, it's very easy to do a scene like this where it's like convincing someone else that this is time travel, both people sort of figuring it out. I think it's handled pretty well. I think obviously Jim Caviezel handles more of the heavy lifting because Dennis Quaid in the scene is being a bit more emotional and a bit more disbelief. But I think it works really well.
Mm-hmm. Gregory Hoblit in the commentary was talking about how he shot them together simultaneously on two sets for the 1969 house and the 1999 house using 4 cameras. There were 2 on each actor, and Hoblit watched all 4 in quadrants on the monitor. And the actors are reacting to the other's voice coming out of the radio. And Hoblit said this was the best way to get, authentic emotion to register on screen and save both time and money on camera setups and in the editing room.
Yeah, it works out. It all feels like simultaneous and right. But yeah, no, I've always thought this cool. I honestly think that this is not one of the scenes that you've listed here, but I honestly think the best use of this is the entire scene in the sequence in the middle where John and Frank are bonding and they know each other exist. They know they have each other. They're just catching up, and it's a really sweet sequence. And I think it's the best emotional stuff in the film. I think it nearly elicited some emotions from me.
Yeah, because it's like, oh, well, tell me about your life. Like, are you married? What do you do? And it's
what have I missed? This film is really good at sequences like that and beats like that as well.
Yeah, and there's a scene where after John tells Frank that, hey, you're going to die in this warehouse fire. If you just go the other way, you'll survive. Yes. But he doesn't believe him. And so Frank is en route to the warehouse fire, and he's wondering if what John told him is true. And I like the way that Quaid plays this here, because it's like when all these things start happening, like learning that, oh yeah, this is how the game turned out and that sort of thing, and details about the warehouse. He's very controlled, and it's very subtle. Like it's almost imperceptible, like how he is processing that information.
Yeah, you can see the wheels turning. And I do love how they intercut the sequence of Frank in the burning building trying to make the right decision with the whole sequence of John in the bar with Gordo and Satch. I like that we get more slow-mo tactics with more intercutting tactics. I like how well pieced together that entire scene is. And I think it works from an emotional standpoint, from an action standpoint. And I think the eventual realization on John is also really cool.
Yeah, because these events are being carried out in parallel. So it's like they're happening at the same time. And so he's waiting. John is waiting to find out if his father made it out alive. And so, it's really tense and just on both sides, like it plays out really well. Later, when John discovers that his mother became a victim of the Nightingale after Frank survives the warehouse fire, he finds out when he uses speed dial to call his mother, and he reaches Noah's Deli instead, which has got to be a nod to Noah Emmerich.
Probably.
And then at the station, he sees the case file with her photo on it. Yeah. And like where they're establishing a plan together, like he and Frank, it's actually a good scene. And Quaid really sells how frightened he is. Like just exactly. Like John gives him the date. And he's, oh, Johnny, that's this week, and he's really panicked, and just, I don't know, just them both at the same time, like, cause they both had just found out what happens. It's like just that sense of urgency and how quickly they're able to develop a plan. Like, hey, he says, I don't know who this guy is, but I know where he's going to be. And so he gives his dad these details about, okay, this is when the next murder happens. This is where, this is who she is. And so as this next half of the movie is unfolding, the stakes feel really high.
Yeah, it completely sets up the stakes in the second half of the movie. And it puts the entire rest of this into motion of just, okay, we have to stop this. We have to find all these other potential victims. We have all these other set pieces to do. And I also like how this entire realization from John is set up by this sort of dream interlude beforehand of just the memories, the new memories sort of flooding in from the funeral.
Right. Because we think it might be his father's funeral, but then we see his father like peek down and see young Johnny under the table hiding.
Right.
And then John later confronts Jack Shepherd, the murderer, in this bar. And I have a lot of issues with this scene. Like I like this scene fine, but it's very cliche. You know, I feel like that was just...
It's well acted.
One, it was reckless on John's part, but it also felt narratively cheap because it's John's big blunder when he gets cocky and approaches Shepherd when he finds out he's the killer, just to let on that he's on to him. And this is the only reason that he comes after John at the end of the movie.
Yeah, I was about to say that. It's the only reason we have our surprise climax.
Right. Like John's just making small talk and slowly reveals like, hey, I know you're the Nightingale. And he's gloating about it because he thinks that he's going to get locked up in 1969. And just the fact that this is the only thing that gets Shepherd involved in the climax kind of irks me a little bit because, I don't know, I felt like we needed a stronger reason. We needed something else happening in 99 to get him there, I think.
Right. I don't know if we needed a simultaneous climax with both of them fighting Shepherd at the same time, even though that does have some cool moments that obviously we'll get into. But like with this setup, we're still on this setup, but like it's fine. It's just like you said. I don't know if we need it. It feels extraneous. It feels like it's trying too hard to really set something up.
Yeah. It's like give us a little bit more of him in 99 or just have the climax take place in 69. And then down the road in 99, he just vanishes from the timeline or something.
Yeah. You don't have to be too cocky with it. You could just have a climax happen. You don't have to have a whole simultaneous gears on top of gears, elements interacting with other elements kind of climax. You could just have a shootout in 1969. That'll be cool.
Yeah. But I guess, we need something for John to do in 99 because, he's the main character. So.
Sure.
Although the functionality of the scene has some problems, like the aged makeup is great, like on Shepherd. Like I think it's the best in the movie, the most convincing anyway, like because it's so subtle. I don't like Quaid's, which we'll get to that in a second when we talk about the climax, but I think it's good makeup.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
So let's talk about the climax, this ending here. So we got, as we said, action in both timelines. Cool. Okay, but the big question for me is what now happens between these two events on the timeline? Yeah. So Frank shows up to save the day in 99, but what happened after that night in 69? Like, was Shepherd in hiding?
Right.
But that doesn't make sense either because later when Shepherd comes after John, like how is the timeline unchanged there? So in 99, did John still confront him at the bar? He must have. So I don't know. That gets kind of confusing. But we know that the police know that he was the guy because Satch and the cops go to Shepherd's apartment and they find these trophies that he took from his victims in these newspaper clippings, which corroborates Frank's story, that Shepherd is the Nightingale. So what do you think?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. Yeah.
There's a lot of questions that are not answered by a lot of this. It's really only just a lot of things are left open in 1969 to allow for a wrap up in 1999. It's just plot convenience. It's just script convenience. This could have been really tied up in 1969, but because we need to have a juicier climax on both ends, Andre Braugher just like, well, we have all these clippings. We have everything that blames him. Guess we can't do anything for 30 years.
Right. It's important to mention, too, that even though Frank survived the fire at the warehouse, he's still dead in John's future up to the point where he finally decides to stop smoking just moments before this climax takes place. So in that moment, he would survive to be in 1999 with John. So why, you know what I'm saying? Like, why isn't he there already? Why does he have to wait till the moment where John's about to get killed by Shepherd?
Maybe he was out there getting some Nicorette gum or something to keep from smoking any more cigarettes.
I have some other issues with this ending. I mean, whenever in 69 Frank shoots off Shepard's hand, and then in the future it changes. It becomes this gnarly time cop transforming hand stuff. We don't need that. And then the furniture in the house upgrades itself. I really hate this, by the way. Like just have it look different in the next shot. Like this is not impressive.
That's cool. That would be cool if it was just like the magic of editing is enough.
Yes, exactly. Just in the next shot, John turns around and the house just looks a little different. We don't need to draw attention to this place changing. I don't like it. It's kind of magical in a way, the way it looks with all the CGI and stuff. It has the brevity of a climax like Jack the Bear without an elevated sense of menace. Like it gets close, like whenever in 69 Shepard threatens young John, but it feels rushed to me. And Quaid's age makeup doesn't look so great, and it's not his best acting. But by the way, great film, Jack the Bear. I got Mondo and Patrick from Thematic Elements on the show to talk about it a while back, and it's a fantastic episode, so go check it out. Small plug. Yeah, and of course, the end wraps up with this sudden Garth Brooks music video, Sans Garth at the end. It's tonally very jarring for me. Like,
yeah,
that and the furniture changing those were my least favorite moments in the movie.
We weren't ready to give up on 90s schmaltz yet.
That's true, yeah. But I don't know. Did you feel like it was a satisfying conclusion to this movie?
I think it was. Look, I liked the ending bit. I liked, the whole baseball scene. I think it was a very cool way to do this. It was a bit too montagey. It was a bit too sappy, but I think that it was a good, nice, sweet way of setting it up. And I did like the climax, even if it was a bit frenzied. It was tense. It was well done. There was a lot going on. There was a lot that was converging on each other. It may be a bit much. It may be a little ridiculous, but it works.
Yeah. Despite the few little nitpicks that I have, I mean, I think given what this movie is and how much it's doing, like how much it's juggling, it's fine. So, Jordan, the award for extra of the film goes to whom?
I love that this is a recurring thing we do now. Okay. It's weird because I kind of had to go back into the film and look for one. I almost gave it to the weird blonde hippie dude in the bathroom who stops Shepard from completely robbing Frank.
We'll give him an honorable mention. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But the winner, the award for extra of the film goes to the screaming, hysterical woman outside the burning building who still gets to Dennis Quaid yelling louder in her face right before he goes into the burning building.
I had a feeling this is who you were going to pick. I can't remember who Hoblet said she was, but she got screen time for a reason. She was somebody.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, we'll be sending her award out in the post.
Yes, we will.
All right, final thoughts. So my thing is, I thought this was a great film. This would have been an outstanding novel, in the vein of something like Stephen King's time travel dramatic thriller 11/22/63, which you haven't read it. You should go check it out. Like, we don't have people physically traveling back through time, but the story has enough complexity to really expand the goings on in both timelines, I think. Because, like I said earlier, I wanted more of the Nightingale stuff. Like, Shepard is an interesting character, but we don't really know much about him. Mm-hmm. And even though he has this mystique, I wanted that to be better developed in each timeline, especially in the future in 99 when we finally get to him, like when he finally shows up. And I thought of Sykes from The Fugitive, just because he's a vaguely similar character in terms of how little he's developed and merely serves as a plot device. But I don't know. What do you think?
I think Sykes is a better character because at least Sykes is a bit more expressive and more like the performance, I think, gives more of like a character there. Whereas I like Shepard in this, but I feel like it's a bit more blank than it should have been.
Yes. And I think the reason I thought of Sykes was the scene when Frank breaks into his apartment and he's looking for stuff. And I just imagine him like coming across a prosthetic arm.
Shepard's vacation photos. Turns out it's not Shepard at all. It's actually Dr. Charles Nichols that actually killed his wife. I'm sorry. This was the only way I could do it, Frank.
Oh, man. It's a terrific premise. It's generally well executed, and I love the science that grounds this film in such a way that accommodates the action and drama without drawing too much attention to itself. The characters are likable. The father-son bonding stuff can be a little sappy at times, but it's satisfying overall. And We have tension. The stakes feel pretty high and stay there long enough to generate a sense of urgency and keep things moving. It's an enjoyable watch. Like, I stood in front of my TV with a cup of coffee on my initial watch and just couldn't tear myself away.
I mean, for me, this movie's biggest weapon is its sentimentality. I mean, it's as a father-son story with fantastical elements. This is a wonderfully feel-good film with some great emotional, wholesome moments, stemming from the premise of a son using a time travel to save his father and finally having a good relationship with him as a dad. Now, the thing I'm still toying with and have been since I saw this is whether the half-mark shift to being a cop thriller is too jarring. And I think now I feel a little bit better about it, but it's still, the second half is still a bit different from the first. I mean, it works well, but it suddenly becomes an entirely different movie without much of a tonal connection to the first half. And it doesn't sour the movie for me. I'm a bit kinder on it than I was when I watched it, but it's a very interesting tactic that I think, knowing more about Gregory Hoblett's career as a TV director, I think makes more sense. But I do applaud both Hoblett's direction as well as the editing and framing used in scenes where the timelines change. I love how this movie used intercutting and bouncing between timelines in a very organized way. Yeah, the second climax came out of nowhere, but it still worked for me and added extra tension and stakes to amount to a truly epic finale that had quite the payoff. In general, this is just a really damn good emotional thriller that knows how to wield fantastical elements without being completely sci-fi driven. Definitely a highlight of early 2000s sci-fi genre.
Yeah.
And now, coming soon to video cassette.
So next time, we're going to be closing out 2020, this trash fire of a year, with a great film, Batman Returns.
Oh, so good. There's a lot to talk about with Returns. There's a lot to do impressions of, and there's a lot to talk about. And hopefully we'll do that one justice, because without spoiling too much, I had a bit of a change of opinion about that movie. So that'll be fun.
It's going to be fun to unpack that one. And because, I mean, that's one I've loved since I was a kid, but I've grown to appreciate it in a deeper way since then.
Right.
Then we'll be bursting into the new year with a Joe Dante picture. It's going to be a blast. Wink, wink.
Nudge, nudge, know what I mean. Y'all can stop recommending it to me now.
And December is already here, and we want to say how grateful we are this holiday season for our casual and preferred renters over on Patreon. Lewis, Mike, and Jack from Random Movie Roulette. Woo! Mondo, Pete, Ryan M., Ryan S., Jacob and Tab from Test Pattern, Naomi and Rich from Bloody in Love, and Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you all so much for supporting the show. We love you guys bunches. Patronage goes towards offsetting the cost of hosting and publishing the show, and every little bit helps us to keep things running smoothly and consistently. So if you're not a patron but are interested in becoming one, head over to patreon.com/VericonVideo for more information about all the great perks you can get starting at $2 a month, the cost of 8 used DVD copies of Frequency.
Yeah!
You'll get bonus episodes not available on our main feed, commentaries, and a super cool gift pack loaded with Vericon Video merch and a few other little surprises from the past.
Courtesy of Tops.
Yes.
Oh, man. Also, please take a moment to rate and review the show on iTunes. That really helps people to find the podcast, and so we'd really appreciate that. Leave something nice for us.
Yeah, please do. And if you have questions, suggestions, or just want to tell us what you think of the show, drop us a line at vericonvideo@gmail.com. You can DM us on Twitter at VericonVideo, or you can call the Vericon Video hotline at 312-620-5560.
And if you haven't interacted with us before, please get in touch. We're both on Twitter. We're out there. We're interacting with fans and friends all the time on there. We'd enjoy hearing from you and to know where you're listening from. You know, we love the community aspect of running a podcast, so we'd love to keep that going.
So that's all for today, but we hope you'll join us again next time, right back here at Vericon Video. So long, everybody.
Good night, and go Mets.
Goodbye, Vietnam! That's right. I'm history. I'm out of here. I got the lucky ticket home, baby.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, Jenny.
Bye-bye, boys.
Have fun storming the castle. Goodbye.
Do take good care of yourself.
What is this, your farewell speech? Going home. Have a good trip.
Hasta la vista, baby. I have to go.
Adieu, auf Wiedersehen, Gesundheit.
Farewell.